What you're about to see is a story of a triumph and a failure. It's a story about a team of talented designers who were virtually locked into their offices and challenged to come up with something amazing. In the age of the PC and internet, this kind of story gets told again and again. But what's different is that this story isn't about inventing a new product. It's about reinventing an old one, the pinball machine. Pinball had always had its golden eras, and despite the belief that video games had killed them, the 1990s saw pinball sales skyrocket. But as the year 2000 approached, something had gone wrong. No one was buying pinball machines anymore. Williams of Chicago, Illinois, was one of only 2 companies left in the world producing pinball, and they were desperate.
There was a lot of pressure from management. They were very blunt with us, and they told us, hey, people are bored. They don't care about what you guys are doing. Another ramp, another toy, another rule, another light show is just not doing it. You guys got to come up with something.
If things didn't change, Williams would leave the business. And as the company that owned 80% of the worldwide market for pinball, in all likelihood, pinball itself would be doomed. But just in the nick of time, inspiration struck.
Pinball 2000 is the next-generation pinball platform. For the first time, video has been completely and successfully integrated into the pinball experience.
When people saw this game, there wasn't any, why'd you do this, why'd you do that? It was like, this is just awesome. This is just unbelievable.
People 10 deep at these games, and hours and hours into the night. I think it was past midnight before we managed to kick them all out of there.
They thought that they had, reinvented the wheel. And in many respects, they did.
And amazingly, the plan worked. The new Pinball 2000 machines were a hit, and Williams Pinball saw its first profit in years. Yet 9 months later, Pinball 2000 was over, mysteriously killed not by the market, but by the company that had created it in the first place. What you're about to see is a story illustrating that there is much more to success than simply being the best at what you do. A story about fighting off the obsolescence that threatens every product, no matter how technologically advanced. The story of a desperate last attempt to save pinball, the product that had defined electronic entertainment for 70 years. The company that came up with Pinball 2000, Williams Manufacturing Company, was started in 1943 by this man, Harry Williams. Harry Williams was famous for designing the world's first electrically powered pinball machine, Contact, a game he'd created a decade earlier for Pacific Amusement Company. But now he was off on his own, starting a company in an era that wasn't the best for pinball, thanks to the government's seizure of factories for the war effort. But Harry Williams knew that when the war ended, the pinball market would be wide open for newcomers, and he was right. Williams found success. Pinball wasn't new in the 40s. Simple machines had been around since 1871. They were tabletop sized then, but grew larger and sprouted legs in the 30s to make it harder for players to cheat by lifting the game. The 30s saw other advances too, but it wasn't until 1947 that something truly extraordinary happened.
There were a lot of other things that happened earlier, like lights and sound effects, the kicking of the ball out of holes. And then, of course, at that time, the introduction of the tilt, which Harry Williams was responsible for. But the biggest change in the entire industry was the introduction of the flippers, because it made all other games that were manufactured before them obsolete. Absolutely obsolete.
For nearly 80 years, the game of pinball consisted entirely of pulling back a plunger and watching a ball fall into a hole. With the addition of flippers, pinball changed from a game of luck into a game of skill. Pinball's popularity exploded, but its success was hampered by legal restrictions. Back in the 30s, manufacturers had experimented with payout pinball machines. They were a sensation, but were branded as gambling devices and banned in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and even Williams' hometown of Chicago. The legal pressure forced manufacturers to stop building payout machines in the 50s, even granting a bonus game for a high score was taboo. But pinball's reputation as a corrupting force was cemented, and it wasn't until the 1970s that it again became legal in America's largest cities. As Detroit is to cars, Chicago is to pinball. Every major manufacturer has been located there. Throughout the 50s, Williams managed a strong second place behind dominant Gottlieb. Harry Williams retired in 1957, and during the next 10 years his company changed hands again and again, becoming part of larger conglomerates producing records, TV shows, even petroleum products. But as those other businesses died off, Williams Pinball stayed around, and just in time for the product to enter one of its best eras, the 1970s. Back in the 40s, flippers had created the first replacement boom. In the late 70s, pinball had its next replacement boom, this time because of computerization. The new solid-state pinballs used computer chips to control the machine, and electronic displays instead of the old score reels. Games became more reliable, and since they were now controlled by software rather than hardware, new features were easier to add.
And there's a wonderful history of the debate of will they play it if it doesn't have the whirring motors and the score drums going around and the bells for sound. Williams even put in motors and ratcheting gears that sat there in the bottom of the box making those noises in their very first models because there were people, that's got to have this.
Longtime manufacturer Bally was the first to go solid state, and combined with a fondness for theming games on 70s pop culture, they became the kings of the industry. Williams jumped into solid state soon after, but Gottlieb, the perennial giant, entered the market late and never recovered, leaving the business in 1983. The industry had convinced players and operators that the old mechanical games were obsolete. And with the new machines racking up record sales, things were going beautifully for the pinball manufacturers, until disaster struck.
They cost about the same price, they made multiples of the amount of money, and they didn't break. Pinballs required a lot of maintenance and care. There was a much better deal for the customer being the operator.
Pinball machine or a video game? Well, they're solid state. It's kind of nice. It's a 4-player, so I can maximize 4 players. Yeah, but they're playing serially. It's one after another. They're not playing simultaneously. This video game is 2 players playing head-to-head. It's like a 30-second game. I can crank it to whatever level of difficulty that I want. It's a smaller footprint, so if I put the game facing this way instead of this way, I might even be able to get 2 video games in that space that I was going to get only 1 pinball machine. So, pinball wound up losing favor fairly quickly.
Pinball stayed popular, but arcades were spending their earnings stocking up on video games and didn't need new pinball machines. The sales drought nearly drove pinball to extinction, but pinball's stock would soon improve. Larry Demar joined Williams in 1980 after graduating from MIT. He'd come on board to do pinball, but was quickly volunteered for duty in the company's brand new video game division. Fortunately, he was good at designing video games too. He and partner Eugene Jarvis created games like Defender and Robotron 2084, which became gigantic hits. But Larry Demar had come to Williams to build pinball machines, and he quickly migrated back to team up with another soon-to-be legend, Steve Ritchie. Together, they helped Williams reinvent pinball for the post-video game era.
What you needed was a resuscitation of sorts, and that came through some design innovations. Double-level playfield, multi-ball, more speech, greater music, bigger light shows. I mean, all of this stuff, giving the playing experience that much more depth.
In the 80s, it was Williams leading the industry out of the doldrums. Games like Firepower, Black Knight, and Space Shuttle not only proved that pinball could compete with video, they also made Williams #1 in the industry, a spot it would hold throughout the 80s and 90s. And pinball continued to evolve.
A pinball machine, say circa 1968, was a game that was a much slower game. The object of those games, while it was to score high, was almost universally to complete a set of targets, to do something in some order, something along those lines. Pinball from approximately 1986 on changed from what it was before. It had the ability to tell a story. I peg it as being the game High Speed. And for anybody who's not familiar with High Speed is a game that was designed by a truly great pinball designer named Steve Ritchie. And he had a software guy that I ended up working with named Larry Demar. And together they created a game, and everybody in the world instantly knew what they were supposed to do when they walked up to the game. It was really simple. Change a stoplight from green to red, and then run the light and get away from the police. And the game told a story. It was a simple story, but it told a story. The game was an enormous success and sold well into the tens thousands. Pinball changed starting then into, why am I here? What am I doing? What story is the game telling me?
As the machines became more complicated, they also became harder to play. Complexity might not sound like a recipe for success, but in this case it was. A whole new generation of pinball fans was born, obsessed with the intricacies of the new games, all of which ushered in pinball's greatest era, the early 90s. Inventions like the dot matrix display and playfield toys were able to again convince players and operators that the older machines were obsolete. Williams became a giant, owning over 60% of the pinball market. It gobbled up Bally to gain another 20%, then produced the Adams family. Designed by Pat Lawlor and Larry Demar, the Adams family became the most successful pinball machine of all time with over 21,000 units sold, this at a time when 5,000 units would have been considered a hit. Williams' huge success drew new talent to the industry. George Gomez was an industrial designer who had formerly worked on video games and toys.
The reality is I always wanted to do a pinball machine because pinball machines to me were these incredible toys. It was like the biggest, baddest toy of them all. When I was doing conventional toys, you're working with an LED and a 9-volt battery, and you're working on something that has to sit on the shelf and cost $19.95. So here's this thing that costs $4,000, and there's some range there to do some cool stuff. Williams was the king. They were really the top of the heap.
And it's not hard to see why designers were attracted to Williams. They became stars within their industry. They had nearly complete control over every aspect of their games, from the layout of the playfield down to the marketing brochures.
Guys like Pat Lawlor and Steve Ritchie at the time were these mythological beings, that designed games that ran, incredible numbers, and they were the visionaries of the game, and that was very appealing to me. Williams was a place where the visionary was king. Management worried about the price of the stock, and we worried about what the games did. And they did come down and make suggestions, but it was a time when you literally could tell them to, as we used to like to say, wait in the truck. We used to, the CEO would come down and say, I think that should be blue. We'd say, okay, I'll take it under consideration. It was incredible control of this product, and these products were a great part of us.
But though the rest of the 90s produced some of the best pinball games ever designed, by the middle of the decade, they just weren't selling anymore. Williams was competing against itself. All the machines they had sold in 1993 were still out on the street making money and didn't need replacing.
The operating public could not discern significant differences from one game to the next. They all kind of blended and melded together. Adams Family, I think, won Best Pinball of the Year for 4 years in a row or 5 years in a row, and it's an incredible tribute, but what an indictment. That's like saying that the upcoming Academy Awards, Titanic's going to win as Best Picture of the Year again. And unfortunately what wound up happening was all the designers, I think, fell victim to designing for the select few.
the shakeout began. A decade that had started with 5 major pinball manufacturers had by 1997 dwindled down to just 2, Sega and Williams.
We'd been getting beat up pretty badly on a regular basis from management saying we're not selling any games, we're not selling as many games as we were, we're not selling as many games as we were. And if you guys don't come up with a way to change that, we're throwing you all out of work and we're closing the division.
Come up with some magic bullet, some solution, and maybe we'll give you a chance to see it through. Maybe.
Williams CEO Neil Nicastro created a program called Pinball 2000 in an attempt to invent something that could make pinball seem new again, or more accurately, something that would make the pinball machines already out on the street seem old. But to do so, management would have to get Williams' 7 pinball design teams to agree in a single direction.
It was like 7 street gangs inside this place. And the street gangs had allegiances to the kings. You know, certain kings had dominance. And at the time, Steve Ritchie and Pat Lawlor were going at it from the standpoint that, you know, my game sold 15,000, so his game had to sell 18,000, and the other guys, oh, now I got to top that. Because when you own 70% of the market, the competition's not across the street, the competition's down the hall. We were not efficient as a modern corporation. Everyone had devices that did similar things and yet were radically different. I think the flippers were standard, and even those designers would manipulate in one way or another.
Beyond the organizational issues, there was the all-important question of whether there was even an exciting new concept for pinball out there to be had. Williams engineers had spent years searching for the next big thing: vertical pinball machines, games with hundreds of balls, even this prototype 3-dimensional game with multiple playfields. But the ideas always had problems. Too expensive, too gimmicky, or simply just not fun enough. None of them were strong enough to be Pinball 2000. None, that is, except for a concept game designer John Popaduke had been toying with, replacing a pinball machine's backglass with a computer monitor that would show not only the score, but animation, movies, even video games that could complement the pinball gameplay. It was decided this would be Pinball 2000. But not everyone was convinced.
It was interesting, but I think a lot of pinball people, the whole idea of a TV monitor and a pinball machine is abhorrent. You know, the first thing you do is go, it's not a video game, I want to play pinball. And all the previous attempts at that had been horrible.
Bally had done a pair of games. One was called Baby Pack Pin, and one was called Granny and the Gators. And those 2 games had a video monitor that faced you. There are inherent problems in putting a video monitor staring straight at you in a pinball machine. And one of those is, if you're playing a pinball machine, you're looking down and you're watching a ball rolling around. Why do you want to be looking up and watching something that's happening on a video monitor? What you end up with are 2 completely separate games that you're trying to glue together and convince somebody that they're playing one game. The operators in our business have a long memory. When you show them something like this, they'll say, that's been tried before, it didn't make me a whole lot of money, why is it going to make me money now? So you'd have a strike against you going in trying to do something like that. We went to a meeting where the CEO of the company was there.
Neil Nicastro is perceptive about entertainment products because he's been in it all his life. I think that he perceived that maybe this wasn't the most exciting thing in the world. And he asked bluntly, who doesn't think that this is the direction we should be taking? And there's a couple of guys, myself and Pat Lawlor and Mark Wayne, raised our hands in this room full of sort of the who's who of design and engineering.
And the group was pretty hostile towards us. They looked at us as being troublemakers. Why didn't we want to get on the program? Why weren't we going to help them save the company?
Just shut up and get on the bandwagon and help us make this thing real. Neil put it, just as bluntly. He basically said, 3 avenues here. You get on this bandwagon, you invent something better, or you get the hell out, because that's all the room there is.
Pat and George knew they were taking a risk. Two of Williams' best designers were telling their CEO that the company's supposed savior wasn't going to save the company. What's more, they didn't have a better idea. Unless they could come up with an alternative quickly, pinball was finished at Williams. But at about the same time, George and Tom Eubank, the software architect for Pinball 2000, stumbled across the same idea, an idea that would utilize an old video game trick.
After going out and eating pizza one night at a local place that had a Asteroids Deluxe. Asteroid Deluxe, if you know, has a partially reflective mirror, and you can see through it, and there's cardboard in the back with asteroids on it that you see that are not moving, but they add extra background and depth to the CRT's reflection of the game Asteroids. And so it came to me that that was a good idea for, that might be able to be applied to pinball.
In fact, it was a good idea. Reflecting a video monitor onto the playfield glass would let the designers create virtual video objects that could react when hit by the ball. The video and pinball halves of the game wouldn't have to be separate. They could be completely integrated with each other. George and Pat thought the idea was worth exploring.
We talked to a bunch of the guys during a Pinball 2000 meeting, and I got up on the board and I said, I think we can do this.
When they described that, the glass is going to reflect, and, the glass is here, and the monitor's there, and the image will be there, and will it be bright enough, and, will it really look, and whatever. I think that I and many just couldn't easily wrap their head around it.
These guys didn't believe us. They basically said, it's going to be this, I don't know. So we said, okay, I think we got to build this and bring it in.
So Pat and George started spending their evenings and weekends building their new machine in Pat's garage.
Over a period of 3 or 4 months, George and I mocked up a model of what we called a hollow pin. We actually, made the cabinet. We made how it worked. We put a monitor in.
We put the thing in Pat's truck and drove it in. Pat had an old big shroud, like a red shroud. I don't know what he was using it for, presentations, very magician-like.
We set it up in a conference room and invited in upper management. And upper management basically came in and they were blown away.
That everyone went, okay, this is still real pinball. It's just like we're painting the targets with video images, but we're still totally playing pinball, and that's a much better use of the monitor.
All these ideas, one after another, from the entire engineering department, and people were smiling again and high-fiving each other. And Neil stood there and he looked up and said, I see the future of pinball and it's starting right here. We all thought we'd done it. It was just terrific.
It took no time for us to get together and say, this is the way Pinball 2000 is going. And that really, set the tone for the rest of the project.
The Pin 2000 effort was the biggest thing Williams Pinball had ever attempted. 2 things had to happen. First, develop the Pinball 2000 system, the platform on which all future games would run. Second, develop a pinball game to run on the system, a game so stunning as to make everyone in the industry sit up and take notice. And it all had to be done by January 1999, 18 months away. 18 months was the same amount of time it took to develop a conventional pinball machine.
Never had pinball made such a transition. The metamorphosis was going to be great. It wasn't, a new feature, a new hardware set. It was everything new. And so we said, we have to get everything right because there's no second chance.
We decided in a meeting that if we wanted to get a Pinball 2000 game out fast, we better not go too many times around the loop designing the game. Let's do a sequel where we know a lot of the properties and elements and we can do it much more quickly. Attack from Mars was just a huge game for us. Very long legs, very good theme, a lot of things to grasp.
Building on the sci-fi theme of Attack from Mars, the team designing the new game, Revenge from Mars, started brainstorming.
These ridiculous Martians come to Earth. They attack all of these different world cities. All of these events, they occurred in your brain. We communicated it to you with audio and limited display effects on the orange 4-color dot matrix display. So now imagine all of those audio things, and we can make them video, and I can beam things up, and I can put Martians on the playfield, literally splat them with the ball. Just a rush of ideas came about what that implementation should be.
Beyond designing the game, there were a host of technical challenges. New software had to be written, artwork had to be created, music composed, and graphic designers who had before only designed in 3 shades of orange for the tiny dot matrix displays learned how to create images in 3D.
Playing a pinball game is this progression of mini games leading up to bigger games, allowing you to progress through the story. So a little game in Revenge might be blow up the Martians that are standing on the playfield. These are basically screenshots of the different art scenarios in the game. This is Martian Attack Multi-Ball. So the reason he's up in the air is because when you project this on the playfield, they look like they're down on the ground, and he looks like he's up in a ramp. Now we're in Italy, Tower of Pisa. The Martians are trying to straighten the Tower of Pisa.
Pinball machines in the 90s typically sold to distributors for about $3,000. For any chance of success, Revenge from Mars couldn't cost much more. But Pinball 2000's PC and monitor were already adding $500 onto the price tag, a huge increase in an era where pinball's appeal was quickly dying. To keep the cost in line, Neil Nicastro dictated that Pinball 2000 would be convertible. With a convertible system, pinball operators would only have to buy the expensive pinball cabinet once, then purchase an inexpensive conversion kit when a new game was released. It was a clever idea, but risky as well. Making the system convertible would lower costs for operators in the long term, but the extra engineering work to do so would drive the initial cost of the machine even higher.
The hard thing that most people don't understand about our business is that these are money-making devices. Okay, their primary function is to make money for the operator. We don't just build things for players. We build things for a whole chain of command. And if I screw up any one of those 4 people, I effectively have harmed the product's ability to be sold.
Every little grimace and gripe and whinge from any operator anywhere in the world we'd written down and would say, all right, how many of these can we address on this platform? We had, playfields that slide in and out easier, little lights by fuses so you could see, which fuse had blown. Pretty much anything you could imagine, they'd thought of. And from a technical standpoint, the platform was just amazing.
From a pinball standpoint, I said, okay, the basic layout of the playfield should not be radically different from what the original one was. This is essentially the starting point of every pinball game. 2 flippers. This blue line represents the footprint of that flipper. We typically begin by putting the ball from the ball trough into the shooter lane. The designer has the ability to do anything he wants. If he wanted to, he could take the ball and have the ball delivered directly to a flipper. Games that do this very quickly are games that are difficult. The player has very little time to respond. That's something that I typically don't do. Most games bring the ball around. There would be a series of gates that would stop it, and then 2 lanes. The ball will bounce around up here, and whichever lane it goes down, that illuminates that light. The next time the ball enters the playfield, you want to complete that light sequence.
Pinball is about a sort of satisfying feeling when you're playing the game, when you're flipping it up, flipping at the ball.
People would say, this shot feels bad. Well, now think about this. How does it feel bad? What feels bad about it? You're standing in front of a wooden box. Your connection to this wooden box are your hands touching buttons. Where's the feel come in? It's a combination of visual and audio things that in turn make the player feel that shot is a good shot. When do we sense that the ball is on the ramp and therefore trigger an event? How much time does it take the ball to go up that ramp and come back around to the player?
All of those things are called the kinetics of a game. And the kinetics of a game are largely responsible for how you perceive what's going on inside the game while you're flipping at it.
These three magenta circles represent jet bumpers. It's essentially a bumper that randomizes the action of the ball. We rack up some minimal score for that, but it gives the player some pause to consider where the ball is coming from. The ball would drain out along this lane and typically come down to the left flipper. This is the flipper spacing, and I did a study on this because we wanted Revenge from Mars to be an easy game to play. My spacing is 6 3/4 of an inch apart, from center of the flipper to center of the flipper. That means that the space between the flippers to drain the ball is roughly 1/8 of an inch greater than the diameter of the ball. And people have, in their heads, they imagine that it's this huge sewer. Everything in the game is designed to reward him the further he gets into the game, make him feel like a hero. We should be going crazy with the lights. The music should come up. The energy of the game, the display should be going nuts. All of those things should be giving the feedback to the player that, wow, look what I just did. That's what a well-designed game does.
Another hot topic was art on the side of the cabinets. A convertible system should have generic art. It should have said Pinball 2000 and whatever is in the box and on the glass. That's what the game was. Some of my very best people all were adamant that, we have to come out with something that looks great for Revenge from Mars, to get Revenge from Mars on the map, to float the system, to live to tomorrow, to have a system that has generic art on it.
Secrecy was critical to ensuring that Revenge from Mars make as big a splash as possible when it hit the market. But Williams also wanted to keep their plans secret from their only competitor, Sega Pinball, to keep them from copying the new design. Williams even farmed out parts to multiple suppliers so that no one vendor saw more than a single piece of the puzzle. But despite all the precautions, rumor leaked out to Sega that something big was happening.
It kind of cracked me up. At Pinball Expo's show in Chicago, on one of their games, Dot Matrix display, they had this backwards image of this text that said, "Can you read this?" And so basically, it was like kind of them poking fun at us, that like, hey, we know what's going on with you guys. And I'm sure they were scared. They weren't leaders, they were followers.
Based on the patents that were written and a lot of other things, it would have been difficult for someone to attempt to mimic what was being done. Not impossible, but difficult. First of all, the amount of resources it takes to design a Pin 2K game is enormous. You instantly double the size of a game team. You don't just need a complete mechanical pinball team. You need a mechanical pinball team and you need a video team.
After 18 months of effort, the game was coming together.
They brought in our distributor from Germany. His name was Hans Rosenzweig from Nova. Nova bought about 40% of our product. They were the 800-pound gorilla customer. And really, as Nova went, Williams went. They brought Hans in and we showed him the Revenge from Mars in progress and waved our hands a lot about the types of things the game was going to do, as well as showing how the platform and system worked. He was speechless. He was absolutely speechless. He thought it was just the most wonderful thing he had seen. That year, for the first time of decades of working with him, I got a personal Christmas card from him, which on the bottom said, "Thank you for Pinball 2000.
I think George and his entire team did an incredible job, given the amount of time they were given to do it, given the amount of pressure they were under to do it.
I thought it was terrific. Oh, I enjoyed it. Even I had difficulty understanding half of it, but I enjoyed it.
The game turned out, way better than management probably would have ever given it a hope to turn out for.
Starting in 1990, Williams decided to get in the slot machine business. While we were embarking on Pinball 2000, the slot machine group started to make money. And so now our combined company was a profitable slot machine company and a dying pinball company.
With slot machines, you can have, a small group can crank out 5 games that are almost identical, save for the artwork. And each game can make a small pile of money. With pinball machines, it's like 6 months of development, all this money in development cost. You often don't know whether or not it's going to be a good game until just before it's done.
As far as the company's corporate results in Wall Street was concerned, the slot machine company couldn't be valued the way they should be because they had this anchor ball and chain attached to them.
The marketing for Pinball 2000 was actually fairly impressive. We always used to joke that marketing consisted of sending a brochure to the trade magazines and then just waiting for the phone to ring. But for Pinball 2000, they made tons of flyers. They sent games to arcades. They did videos.
I'm inside this Pinball 2000 game to show you how the new Pin 2000 system works.
They did. I think they even had classes, on what the game was going to be like. They did a huge show in London, for the launch of Revenge from Mars.
We found out a lot of things getting this show together. Half of the games came in various configurations of cracked open, bent, warped. Our new design and our packing material hadn't quite been everything it needed to be to survive being forklifted on and off of trucks. On the software side, we found out a couple of things. One was we had a memory leak in the program, so if the games were run for about 40 minutes without repowering them, which nobody ever did in development, the games would lock up and freeze, which is really embarrassing at a trade show. Neither of those setbacks, were major enough. We put the cabinets back together that had fallen apart, and we did our best to reboot the games in between plays often enough that the memory leak didn't kill us.
Finally, it was time to show Pinball 2000 to the world.
No matter how hard some may try to stop it, change is constant.
I have a dream today.
And man will always strive for perfection. Once in a lifetime, someone leaps over the edge and forever changes the way we think.
The game was just a smashing success at the show. Everybody embraced it. It was just the coolest thing anybody had ever seen. This was a magical thing. We had done it.
Even at the slightly elevated price of $3,200, pinball distributors were excited by Revenge from Mars, and orders poured in quickly. All Williams had to do now was convince players to play the game.
Pinball people always consider themselves separate from video game people. We're pinball people. We love pinball. Pinball's a mechanical thing. Video games will never be pinball. When we launched the web pages for Pinball 2000, we started getting mail right away from people. I've seen this product. I don't like it. It's a video game. This isn't pinball. Some of the mail was pretty hateful. They thought we were actually taking pinball and just destroying it, that we were just turning it into a glorified video game. They didn't get it.
A lot of people look at Revenge from Mars and say, there's too much video, they ruined pinball and so on. They really don't think that we had to emphasize the video screen. We had to show it off. That otherwise people would have looked at it and say, why am I spending more per game, when it's just a regular pinball machine?
But the game had its defenders too, and most skepticism disappeared when players actually played the game. Williams found itself with its biggest hit in years.
We ended up selling about 7,000 units, and the company, the pinball division, actually made a profit for the first quarter, probably in about 2 years.
While Williams celebrated its success, the second Pinball 2000 design team was already well into developing the critical follow-up to Revenge from Mars.
The original intent actually was to have the first game be a license and actually have it be Star Wars, not Revenge from Mars. The timing wasn't right in terms of when we wanted to launch. That was actually the richest agreement that we had done as a license for a pinball product, but not totally out of the realm of what I thought was realistic. For this, I felt that all bets were off and we had to. I mean, we needed this to help the platform.
Led by John Papaduke, the man behind the original Pinball 2000 prototype, the second P2K team worked to make Star Wars Episode 1 the ultimate pinball machine.
We had a whole deal with Lucas because the movie wasn't out yet, and he was very much trying to keep any details from leaking out, that our group was literally locked away in a section of the building behind a locked door that no one was allowed into unless they had a signed agreement with Lucas. If details of the movie leaked out and therefore the movie didn't do as well, we could each be personally held responsible for that amount of money that he thought he didn't make because the details leaked out. So we were quite serious about maintaining that secrecy.
Oh God, I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I missed interacting with the other programmers. I missed having, the other designers and the other members of engineering coming into the office, my office every now and then and playing the game and giving feedback. It's really hard to design a game by yourself.
We actually got to read the script early on in the fall of '98. They wouldn't send the script out. We had to go to his place, the ranch, Skywalker Ranch, and just sit there on the porch and read the script. And we could take notes, but we couldn't make photocopies or take the script with us.
The team received 3D models of characters and spaceships from the film special effects team to use for the game. John Papaduke and lead artist Kevin O'Connor even dressed as characters from the movies to create some of the video sequences.
I think in all the teams there was a lot of debate about how much use to make of the video. We really didn't want to turn it into a video game.
I really wanted to design it like a regular pinball machine, but being the first or second Pinball 2000 machine, coupled with a very visual movie like Star Wars Episode 1, we had to pour a lot of work into the video screen, which is exactly what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to do a video game with a playfield sticking out of it.
They were very picky about what we did. Colors we used on the playfield. There's no pink in the Star Wars universe.
You got to change the color. He's not so blue. Make him less blue and stuff like that.
And then of course how much Jar Jar to put in the game is always an argument. But it was clear that Lucas was investing a lot in that. Jar Jar was going to be the cool character that everybody loved. So it was interesting to try to decide ahead of time whether. And I think we probably put too much Jar Jar into the game. When it was fairly nearly done, when we had our first complete game built with a painted playfield and in a cabinet with the right side art, we had a lady from Lucas Licensing come out and play it. We were very nervous. We'd taken a few liberties with their Star Wars license.
There's one mode in there called Jedi Council Musical Chairs, with this sort of goofy Pop Goes the Weasel-ish music. All the council members are lined up and you make a shot and they jump around. And we thought for sure that would go. She made the shot and she started that mode, and John, Duncan and I, we sort of all look at each other and then look off to the side waiting for her comment, and she just started laughing.
And she was blown away. She absolutely loved it.
But getting the balance right between the video and pinball halves of the game was a challenge.
It did not help the game to not have the eyes of the rest of the group. I had my doubts about the game itself. I kept thinking, there's a lot of movie here. I don't know how much game there is. I didn't want to upset anybody. I remember one time I was playing it in a room. Neil Nicastro came in and he was raving about it, and I didn't know what to say, so I just walked out of the room because I kept thinking, well, I hope you're right. I really hope you're right.
There was, at the beginning of May, this is even before the movie came out, there was a big Star Wars convention in Denver. We wanted to take some games out there and see how total non-pinball players but Star Wars fanatics would like the game, because that was going to be a big part of Pinball 2000, is drawing people in that don't normally play pinball. And there was a lot of debate internally whether we should go out there because we were showing the game earlier than we normally would. And there was some debate with Lucas because there was stuff in the game that you wouldn't see unless you'd seen the movie. But it all finally worked out at the last minute. We got a booth. It was so last minute that in all the programs and everything, the booth was labeled Pez, I think. The Pez people had decided not to come to the show. We wrapped the games up in black plastic and shipped them through a bonded carrier, to get them there. So it was totally secret until the first day of that show we unwrapped them. everybody knows what a pinball machine is, but a lot of these people hadn't ever played a pinball machine or hadn't seen one in years, and then all of a sudden we're hitting them with Pinball 2000, all this cool technology and this cool theme that they're all very into, and there were just lines to play that game all 2 or 3 days we were there. A lot of the debate about taking it to the Denver show was we never show pinballs before they're ready for sale. Or distributors going to get mad. They're still trying to sell Revenge from Mars, and here we are showing the next game. Just all this politics about it. But as it turns out, word of that pinball machine did not escape the Star Wars community. It never got out to the pinball community. I guess there's almost no intersection between those two communities.
As far as the great pinballs of history goes, Star Wars is certainly not one of them. The theme was a great draw, and the game, anyone could play it. It was a pinball machine your grandmother could play. You put your money in, you flip the ball around, you hear, the characters say their special quotes, and you're done, and you have fun, and the game's pretty. That's really what John and Duncan and I were going for.
There was a lot of expectation. I mean, everybody was saying, if Revenge is going to sell 7,000, Neil said this, if Revenge is going to sell 7,000, you want to sell 10,000 of Star Wars.
I really had high hopes that those guys were giving the Star Wars audience what they wanted, which was lots of Star Wars eye candy. And so I thought, they're going to deliver on this. That part they're going to nail. My opinion has always been that it's a very pretty game, but there isn't enough there to keep me coming back, and that's what worried me about it.
It did not ship when the movie came out. I think the original plan way back when was it would ship coincident with the movie. Then there's the whole problem that Williams always sells their pinballs in Europe first and then sells them in the US, and Lucas distributes their movies just exactly the other way around. By the time games really started shipping in the US a month or two later, it was Star Wars what? Oh, I remember that movie. We just totally missed that window of opportunity there.
Episode 1 was not the best license in the world. When we got the Episode 1 license, we thought we had scored gold. I mean, this movie was so hyped and such a big deal after all the time, with no Star Wars from Lucas and company.
And I don't think anybody expected that movie to go up that fast and then drop that fast.
But it wasn't just problems with the license. Management dictated that the price of the Star Wars machines had to be increased yet again to around $3,500. The increase helped cover the high cost of the Star Wars license, but also, management felt confident. The success of Revenge combined with the strength of Star Wars, Williams figured the price increase would easily be borne by the distributors. It wasn't. Many of them canceled their pre-orders. Yet despite these problems, Star Wars Episode 1 still managed to sell over 5,000 units.
It's better than the 3 or 4 that we were breaking even with or being happy with later, but I think management saw a trend. And the trend was, okay, here's your game with the technology, it's Revenge from Mars, and you maybe could have done anything with it, and it could have been any kind of quality, and it probably would have still sold the same. Then the next game, it's like the next game is the important game, because you're like, okay, if people buy the technology, then you have to do something really solid to get them coming back. It just didn't materialize, and quite ironically, Sega at the time does one of their best games ever with South Park, earnings-wise, when Revenge from Mars came out. And a lot of places, South Park would go toe-to-toe with Revenge. And South Park was cheaper, quite a bit cheaper.
Less than expected sales meant that the Star Wars production run would end early. But there wasn't a new machine to build. The 3rd and 4th Pin 2000 machines were still being worked on.
Gaps in production are very, very expensive because of the hundreds of people on the production facility making these games either have to be laid off or hang around and not do very much. And this was a really bad storm to be brewing in the Pinball 2000 scene.
Because of the production gap, the pinball division that had just seen its first profit in years now faced a multi-million-dollar loss. Rumors were circulating just around the time of Pinball Expo, an industry show where George had been asked to talk about the birth of Pinball 2000.
I had a lot of friends in high places that had pretty much told me, I think the writing's on the wall for you guys. I think that Neil has reached the conclusion that he's going to shut down pinball. And I thought, oh, God, this is just, what now? One of my sources had said, Monday, it's over. And I was incredulous because I thought to myself, it can't be Monday. Why are they letting us go to Expo? On one side, I knew it was going to be Monday. I thought that it won't be Monday. I didn't believe it.
Everyone was in awe. They couldn't understand why it happened, or here we'd just done this thing that, from all that we could tell, was a total success. Why would they do that?
The product wasn't even a year old yet. You know, can you imagine, General Motors sinking all this money into a brand new state-of-the-art car and then killing it 9 months later?
Had we just fallen flat on our faces, it would have been very easy for them to say, okay, we are a slot machine company now. We don't have to worry about this anymore. But since we didn't have this black and white scenario, now it became complicated again.
I cornered Neil in the parking lot. He was going out to his car and I was leaving, and I just, whatever, just out of the blue went up to him and said, okay, who pulled the plug? And he told me that, he saw the writing on the wall and he just wanted out. He was like, we were able to make some money at it and now it's time to go.
A botched effort to migrate employees to Williams' slot machine or video game divisions required pinball employees to give up all seniority and accrued benefits. And to avoid internal bidding wars, the two divisions weren't allowed to offer salary increases to any of the traditionally underpaid pinball workers. As a result, most left Williams to find jobs elsewhere.
It was a bad, bad thing. It was...
I mean, everybody always joked about, oh yeah, Neil's going to come in and close us down. And then it's like reality hits and they're like, I can't believe he closed us down. And it's like, well, he was telling you the whole time. He's telling all of us.
Was I surprised when pinball was shut down? No, I was relieved. The stress of going to work in an environment every day where you're constantly being told what you're doing is not good enough. The stress of going to work in a place where you used to be, and I don't mean me, I mean the group, was held in high esteem, and now they weren't held in high esteem, was huge.
Well, it kind of hurt. It kind of hurt because you knew that the boys are going to be going all out looking for jobs where there weren't other companies that they could go to and pass their capabilities to. They have to start maybe starting their own companies, making games. And then again, they have to worry about, hey, if we build the games, where are we going to sell them? Who are we going to sell them to?
No single reason exists for why Williams exited the pinball business.
This product cost too much money for the current marketplace.
They could just make a lot more money from doing slot machines with a lot less work.
We also couldn't get enough games out to keep our production line going in the face of an environment where we weren't going to be allowed to make too many mistakes.
But the biggest mystery is why Williams didn't sell the pinball business to any of its competitors or customers.
We also thought, okay, we're closing the doors, but put a pretty ribbon on it, sell us off to somebody who really appreciates what we do, and we can continue. But again, that wasn't in the cards.
I think sometimes you find yourself in situations in business where you don't want to run the risk of being proven wrong. And if someone else can make a go of something that you have decided or determined is not really viable anymore, I don't know how well that sits.
And actually, now it becomes worth less and less as every day goes by, because all they really had were their engineers, their talent, and they had some intellectual property that every day, I mean, the clock's ticking on all that stuff. And you wake up in 20 years and it's all worth zero. So I'm kind of surprised that, they just didn't say, well, we'll get what we can for it. Because my guess is they're not going to get anything. And, I mean, whatever. It's not my business, I guess.
The actual idea of video in a pinball is not a bad idea. I think it remains to be seen if it'll ever see the light of day again. But for sure, there was a lot of good things that were done as part of that project.
We succeeded. Management gave us an impossible goal, and we sat there and we actually did what they thought we couldn't do.
We didn't really win. We lost. I gave it everything I had. I think that those 50 guys that worked on it, they also passionately did everything that they could.